History was made yesterday as Bola Tinubu, the former governor of Lagos State, was sworn in as the 16th president of Nigeria. Tinubu, in his inaugural address at the Eagle Square, unveiled a series of steps he will take to position the country on the path of economic development, stability, and prosperity. After taking the oath of office in Abuja, Tinubu immediately swung into action, announcing his inaugural speech at the end of the country's controversial petrol subsidy. The subsidy had for so many years been an albatross that had hindered the economy by stripping it of the badly needed development funds.
On fuel subsidy, unfortunately, the budget that I've glimpsed before I assumed office and what I've had is that no provision is there for fuel subsidy. The fuel subsidy is gone. Subsidy can no longer justify an ever increasing cost and the wake of dry resources. We shall instead the channel whatever to fund to better investment in public infrastructure, education, healthcare, and jobs that will materially improve life for people.
So joining us now on the morning show to take a look at Nigeria's economic task, both internally and internationally, with Tinubu at the helm of affairs, is Professor Ndubisi Nwokoma, a professor of financial economics and director of the Center for Economic Policies Analysis Research of the University of Lagos. Real quickly, good morning, sir. Let's go straight to it. Subsidy is gone. Yes, but we're seeing the effects today on the streets, queues everywhere. Some filling stations in some parts are saying 500 naira per litre. I've seen pictures of filling stations that are saying 600 naira per litre. Some are still buying at the normal rates that fuel used to be before. What is going on? Is this a right move at this point in time, or phased out subsidy will have been better?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, viewers. I watched the president deliver the inaugural address yesterday, and then the statement that fuel subsidy is gone. At face value, yes, somebody would say that is the best thing to do. But I think a more pragmatic approach could have been taken in being able to address this lingering issue. It has been lingering for a long time, and there have been various discussions and seminars by the Nigerian Economic Society and other bodies on how to handle this fuel subsidy issue. Yes, government should get out of this fuel subsidy trap, and but the approach, I have a problem with the big bang approach, because it has a lot of implications in the short term for the economy. And I must also want to go back into history and say that the president and the past president, they were those who were against the subsidy issue. And they said that there was no subsidy when the government of Goodluck Jonathan had introduced the issue many years ago. However, they have repented and they believe that there's a subsidy. The approach, because the consequences are actually very serious. It's going to be highly inflationary. And in my view, what could have happened was to remove the subsidy, but in a more planned approach, maybe phase it. And then, secondly, the fact that the previous president did not budget for subsidy does not mean you should just quickly jump into the bandwagon and just follow the template is set for you. Because even the past president, President Buhari himself, did not implement subsidy removal as originally planned in the Petroleum Industry Act, the PI, which is signed into law. It was postponed. And so if you are coming as a new president and you have a trap or something, a template prepared for you, you don't just walk into it. You may need to remove the subsidy, but not walk into a template. The fact that in the budget there was no subsidy provision does not mean you should just quickly, you may need to actually remove it, maybe make some little allowance, and then you phase it out. So by the end of this year, you find that you have removed it, because we need to remove it. But by the big bang approach, in my view, may have serious consequences for the Nigerian economy, at least in the short term.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that in terms of the immediate impact on the Nigerian economy and the Nigerian people. I'd like to make reference to a tweet by the founder of Budget, where he talked about some of the provisions to cushion the effect of the removal of subsidy, or what must be in place for it to be successful. He talked about reducing food inflation. He talked about providing an alternative source of transportation, and also a social investment plan. What's your view in terms of, now the announcement of the removal of subsidy has been made by the president? I don't believe there will be a going back on that. What must there be in place for this to be successful and to cushion the impact on the ordinary Nigerian?
Yes, I agree totally that something should be done to handle this, to manage the consequences. And before now, there has been this talk about enhancing domestic refining capacity before you now begin to embark on this. And thank God we have the Dangote refinery coming up on stream. And we have heard all this before in the military era, when government will say we're going to increase the pump price of fuel, and then we're going to deploy the proceeds into infrastructure. This is not the first time we're hearing that. It's been said over and over again by the government of Obasanjo, by the government of Jonathan. All these governments, when they make this pronouncement, they always tell us that the gains from this subsidy removal will be deployed into agriculture, into road construction and all that. So that is not a new thing. We've had that before. But when it comes to seeing those things actually affecting infrastructure, actually it is lacking. What government could have done, even though, like we said, there's no going back on that, what they could have done was to have to wait a little bit. Let us see the Dangote refinery bringing out local products. Let us now begin to make sure we can gradually, manage the consequences. Because in Nigeria, more often than not, because of distortions in the system, there are distortions. When prices go up, they hardly come down. In many cases, there are a lot of distortions in the system. The linkages are not actually as would have been expected in a normally functioning economy. So when you allow the prices to go up, and then you now begin to moderate the consequences, it may take time for it to simmer. There's this lag effect in transmission. There's a lag effect. So now that it has been done, it's saying no going back on subsidy removal, fine. Government should now go ahead and begin to provide cushion, very, very convenient cushion for the ordinary person in terms of being able to provide public transportation. I agree entirely with that. And look for other means to ameliorate. Of course, government also had the provision that the money borrowed from the World Bank, I think about $800 or $1 million or so, to be able to cushion the effects. And the plan, from what I know, was to kind of distribute money. Sharing cash actually may not be the way out. But how to address the consequences of the removal would be the way government should actually go. And I think that could have been avoided if we had this phased approach in the removal of subsidy. I support the removal of subsidy, but the approach of removing it, in my view, I have some little concern about that.
I mean, Prof, I also support the removal of subsidy, but like you said, it's the approach that is problematic. But two things. You see, because you economists keep saying short term, and I would like to extray that line of thoughts. In the short term, it's going to be inflationary. Is it only in the short term? And I'll give you a reflection of when subsidy was removed in diesel. Because, when subsidy was removed in diesel, this was what we said too, when we deregulated diesel. We said in the short term, prices will stabilize. But diesel price never stabilized since then. And it's been many years down the line. So, but the counter argument I know you like to give is the fact that, yeah, we have the Dangote refinery and all of that. But will it truly stabilize when it comes to the short term? But we have to find a way around it. Secondly, isn't it time for us, and I think this is one part we don't do too much in our governance, to be doing the econometric analysis of governmental decisions and policies? Because if we had factored in the econometric analysis, I'm not sure that this knock-on effect of that announcement was envisaged. Because it is only when inflation's number come out we'll see the inflationary impact on the economy. Thirdly, also the need for the econometric analysis is the fact that this talk about convergence of interest rate, of forex rates between the parallel market and the other market. But we forget, based on econometric analysis, that it's going to have a knock-on effect also on our debts that are denominated in dollars. We also forget that our problem is really the humongous supply, which most of the time, yes, might be occasioned by industry, but is also occasioned by a massive level of corruption in this country. Also, econometric analysis make me understand that there was over 100% or close to about 60-70% jump in price of naira to the dollar after the political party primaries, which means that the political parties also added to the problem on ground by converting most of the money they had into US dollars. And that's why I say, isn't it time for us to have a proper econometric analysis of most of these decisions? Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I agree entirely with you, because when you are talking about effects of policy, you need to do kind of scenario building. You do scenario 1, 2, and then you run your simulation. You say, if I tinker with this variable by X%, what happens to other variables? So you build a macroeconometric model. And when you do that, you can now do your simulation. And that helps you to know effect, because everything affects everything. Let me take the first point about the issue of diesel. When you increase the price, and then you expect, if there are no distortions, that when the system normalizes, the prices will come down. That is, if there are no distortions in production and in the supply chain, if there are no supply chain disruptions, if there are no distortions in the system, and there's a kind of rent-seeking culture in the economy, then you have the prices never come down, like the case of diesel. So that is why it is not always proper to just make an announcement. That's what we call the announcement effect of policy. That's what we are seeing now. What we're seeing is the announcement effect. It affects every market. If you say, I'm going to travel to Lagos to Aba tomorrow, there's an announcement effect. Those who actually are dealing with me will begin to make adjustments. So now you can see the marketers adjusting, because that is the announcement effect of yesterday, and that is what is happening to the prices. So because of the distortions in the economy, you don't see these prices coming down in the long run as you will have expected. So I think, I don't know, before such announcement could have been made, there will have been some kind of this simulation you have mentioned. Econometric analysis, do a big picture perspective of this whole issue, and then see how it affects the markets. It affects the foreign exchange market. Because when you do this, all prices will go up. Now, the inflation we are experiencing in the past few months was the inflation from the Naira redesign, when cash was not made available and prices became very, very high. POS were charging some big amounts for people to collect money. And we are still trying to come out of that. And now we are having this announcement effect of the inaugural speech. So I think there's need for caution when talking about policy. So if that is a step that could have been withdrawn, I would have said, yes, they needed to take a look at it more closely. Supporting the fuel subsidy removal is not in any way in question. I think there are these challenges in the economy. There are a lot of distortions in the flow of goods and services. And then the issue of imported inflation, which we needed to avoid because we have not been able to strengthen our domestic refining capacity. So we're seeing importing inflation. There will have been need to cut off that portion of it where we import inflation from those who supply us these refined products. And then we now focus on the domestic inflation. What could have been done was to have made some extra provision for this subsidy for a few months, and then you let Dangote come on stream. And that will now help you to moderate your inflation. And then you can, before the end of this year, then remove the entire subsidy. I have my concern about this big announcement effect. And I hope the new government will be able to manage the consequences on prices and on the Nigerian people.
Well, I want to just examine what you said with regards to the removal, that perhaps they should have made extra budgetary allocation to subsidy to the end of the year. Do you not think that this issue that we're having today is as a result of the previous administration, where they had said that they had only 6 months to remove subsidy, following the signing of the PIA, and following which they would then remove it gradually? So this ought to have been done in the last 1 month. Therefore, they put a burden on this new administration, leaving them little or no choice but to make this particular decision, particularly if they're saying that there's no money to fund subsidy further. That's the first question I'd like to ask you, because what would you have him do if there's no money to fund subsidy further? What are the options? What are the other options available to him? Because the previous administration didn't phase it out as they ought to have done, making a way for him to establish the removal of subsidy. And then beyond that, I'd like you to also examine some of his announcements or during his speech yesterday. One of which, obviously, of much interest to us is his target of 6% growth in the GDP. He said he would achieve this by budgetary reforms and also industrialization policies. I'd like to get your take on this and what a budgetary reform should look like under this administration.
Yeah, thank you very much. The first point I want to make is you don't walk into a trap. If somebody before you has set a trap for you, you don't walk into it. We can understand that the Buhari administration did not see the need to immediately remove the subsidy. They didn't see that need. They were shifting it, probably for political reasons, probably. They didn't want to have the backlash from the public, and they had to shift it until they were out of office. And then you are coming into office, and then you could just quickly walk into it. I think that might not be a very, very wise move, to just walk into a trap set for you, and then you needed to make some extra provision. Where would the money come from? Where has the money been coming from before now? We've been borrowing. Our debt service ratio to revenue is about 95%. So you've been earning 100 naira and paying debt with about 95 naira, and you borrow more. They've been borrowing more. A little bit of that could have done to cushion the effect, and then you manage this removal over time. So by the end of this year, it will have gone completely. So where would the money come from? Where the money had been coming from before now? We could have also been able to do that and phase out this crisis. So the other issue is about the GDP. The GDP is actually going to grow when you address these locations in the economy. What are those factors that are affecting the supply chain? What are those disruptions? The issue of insecurity has to be addressed, which I'm happy he said he will do. Address the issue of insecurity. Address the issue of your foreign exchange. I'm also happy they try to harmonize the rates in the market. But you also have to know there are cost push factors that are driving inflation. And all those ones affect how fast your economy can grow. The GDP has to grow. So if you look at, I want to believe they must have looked at those factors that are causative, that are on the transmission path to enhance your GDP. If you're able to follow on those engine growth factors, address the issue of oil theft, where we will now be able to bring out more money, because it is actually sad that the former president was the Minister of Petroleum, and under his watch, we had a very, very high level of oil theft. So we're able to address those factors. And then you're able to enhance production. People need to travel to wherever they want to travel without fear of being kidnapped and all that. People need to go to farm. So these are areas which you need to address. Once you address those areas, of course, the GDP will grow. But 6%, in the short term, I have my little doubt, my little concern, unless a miracle will happen. But you have to, if you don't take the right steps on this subsidy issue, it boomerangs and affects production and affects supply chain, then it will be difficult for you to achieve this 6% growth rate in GDP. Address the issue of production. and what is hindering production. And those factors that people are complaining about, once you address them, definitely you grow at the rate you desire.
All right, yeah, but I think part of that, he also talked about addressing multiple taxation, which also affects, production companies. Probably we also look at reversing hitherto made laws as regards excise duties for beverage companies, which employ a sizable portion of the working population in this country. I mean, I think about close to 5%, and now the taxes are so high for them they can barely produce. But the question I'd like to ask now is about this convergence of exchange rates. Again, maybe we need to have an econometric analysis to the convergence of exchange rate arguments. Let's look at the variables. One of the things that take a lot of that pushes the need for dollar in this country, apart from industry and apart from school, apart from medical, is also corruption. And apart from the informal sector, is also corruption. The level at which corruption demands dollars is unprecedented. I mean, we see that outplay in even the growth of our real estate sector. Let's put in that variable in this econometric analysis. Vis-a-vis converging the rates for the other variables that support the convergence of the rates, which is foreign direct investment and other foreign inflows. What's going to be your say as regards? It's also owing to the fact that we might also ramp up our debts because the cost of debt will increase once you converge the rate and the Naira has to find a level. And I also put in an historical antecedents. 1986. Exactly the same thing we did. We said it will find its level at 3 Naira, from 1 Naira to $1. It will find its level at 3 Naira. We all remember how the story continued up to 11 Naira and it kept on going. What's your take on this, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the issue of corruption is very, very critical in the foreign exchange market. From my little knowledge about these markets, and my, in the industry, I have never seen a kind of high level of scam as in the past administration, where you have a scam in the foreign exchange market. There's a lot of round tripping. The margin has never been as wide as it was under Buhari administration. When you have the official rate is about 463, and you have the parallel market rate about 750. I'm not sure in the history of this country we've had this type of gap, because there is these allegations of political interference in the market, where people usually get there are so many middlemen involved in the market that people get allocations and then they sell off, and there's a lot of round tripping going on. I think that is a major factor. Before you are traveling abroad, you apply for your travel allowance, PTA. Within a week, you get it now. Or you want to pay school fees. You fill in your papers, you fill your Form A, you get it within a short time. If as far back as even under this administration, but the gap between the parallel market rate and then the official rate is so wide, because if it pays, it stays. If something pays, it stays, because some people are benefiting from the gap. And the gap has refused to go away. So you hit the nail on the head. This is purely corruption. The scam is there, and some banks may actually be benefiting from this. So that is actually where the Tinubu government will have to look into. Eliminate this scam. Eliminate this round tripping. The rates will automatically begin to come together. They begin to match. If there is nothing in it, the margin will actually be not very little. If you want foreign exchange now, if you want to get it, you get it today. You just call your malam, like people do, or go to the bureau de change, and then you get it at a high rate. But if you want to apply through your bank, you cannot. You have to go to CBN by fill your Form A, and it takes a long time before you have your Form A number. So people don't actually access foreign exchange through the official route. It is actually the parallel markets. That really is a functional rate where you can actually buy and sell foreign exchange in Nigeria. So eliminate that scam. Find out what are those factors that are causing it. And once you eliminate that, it will not be too difficult to converge the rates. Because it pays, therefore it has been staying. That, in my view, is the major factor that actually made it be so wide under the Buhari administration, which Tinubu, in my view, should make effort to correct. And if you correct it, automatically the rates will come in, because the rates also affect inflation. There's the pass-through effect. Because when you make also the interest rate, there's a link. When you make interest rates very, very low, and then the gaps are there, there's a pass-through effect. You make credit cheap, people can actually get money, and they can't invest in industry because there's no good environment. What they do, they invest in financial assets. They invest in dollars. And once they invest it, to be able to make a very big margin. So address the scam in the market. Once you address the scam, these issues will be addressed, with time.
All right, Professor Nwokoma, I have two questions for you. The first is in terms of, just to summarize your thoughts in terms of what's the way forward now. He's made the announcement. Already there are reports from the field that transporters have increased transport fare almost immediately after the announcement was made. We see queues on the road already, fuel queues on the road already. Do you think that the president should perhaps take a few steps back from his assertions around fuel subsidy or announce plans immediately as to the timeline for the removal of subsidy? He didn't give that during his speech. And then the second aspect of something else he talked about, which is a big concern and which featured quite prominently for him during his campaign, was unemployment and tackling the issue of unemployment. Unfortunately, we don't have very recent figures from the NBS, but we know that it's an issue that many of those who campaigned had talked about, and he specifically spoke to. He said during his inauguration speech that he was going to create 1 million jobs through the digital economy space, and also the Jobs and Prosperity Bill in the House. What are ways, in your view, to begin to tackle this menace of unemployment?
Okay, thank you very much. The way forward, in my view, government needs to backtrack. When I mean by backtracking, not necessarily on the policy, but on their strategy. If now there's hoarding of the products, which I think may be available, because the marketers actually need to protect themselves. The economy is capitalist. People are in business to make money, and they've committed money, and they find that they are buying at X price, and they may not be able to replace. That's what you call a replacement cost. The replacement cost actually will not be higher than the historical cost. So government needs to come around and bridge that gap between the historical cost, the cost at which they bought those products, and at which actually they will buy the next one. Because if I have 10 liters of products, and I sell at the old price, and I'm going to buy to replace my stock at a higher price. Of course, I want to increase my price now so I can replace my stock. So government needs to engage the marketers and be able to carry that margin. That is what they can do now. If actually what they think is actually the price is 500 and it's now 180, they need to come and take that gap from them. Government needs to tell them, please sell. We're going to pay you the difference. That is what government can do, and still let the price, let them supply at the old price until they begin to buy at the new price. Then the whole thing will come on. That is the first thing they can do. Second, that is if they don't want to go back and do it in phases. Secondly, they need to also begin to provide this cushioning effect. It's very, very important for the public, so that the pains will not be too difficult. Because once these prices go up, they hardly come down. Because like I said, this economy have lots of distortions that prevents the prices from going down, like you mentioned, the case of diesel. On unemployment, I think what the president said yesterday, in my view, many of them were just like a wish list. We had that before under Buhari, and in fact, the enthusiasm was higher under Buhari's administration. When Buhari came into office, the enthusiasm was higher. This current government needs to carry the people along, because about only 8 million people, 8.7 million voted for him. About 14 million that voted did not vote for him. So more people were not for him as those as for. So he needed to actually make sure the pains on those and everybody will not be that much. Unemployment. The last government promised to provide about 3 million jobs a year. He is promising 1 million. Instead of having 3 million jobs a year, we had job losses. And so if you are talking about creating 1 million jobs per year, then you will need to know what would be different. the power will be more available. What are you doing with the generation of power? What are you doing with all those factors that will make you to create jobs? Because creating jobs means there must be production. People will have to work. There will be available power, there will be security and all that, and then jobs will be created. The GDP is growing. What are you going to do? How will you enhance generation of power? How are you going to create those jobs? What will you do differently from what was done by the Buhari administration? What will you do differently? We must see what we are going to do differently. If not, the same thing will just reoccur where you say we create 3 million jobs and you end up with job losses. Now, we hear of this new terminology among the youth, jackpa. People want to jackpa. I'm in the university system. How many of our graduates come out from school and get jobs? Less than about 10%. You have about 100 students that graduate. Only about 10 or get jobs. Many of them actually are those who have one link or the other with others. So many people just come out and find a way to help themselves. So we need to see what he will do differently, so that will not just be like a wish list where we say, I will do this, I will make power more available, I will provide jobs, I will do this, I will do that. And if we don't see how you will do it, it just becomes like a wish list. But we hope that the economy can pick up and things can normalize in no distant time.
Okay, Prof, he talked about the agricultural sector. He talked about agricultural board. But I believe that agricultural boards can be talked about when you have agricultural output. As we speak today, we know the impedance output has. Agriculture has as regards output. We all know the legacy problems. Take, for instance, as we speak in Nigeria today, post-harvest losses is still about 50%. Half of the things we produce cannot be saved properly, cannot be stored. We still have a lot of perishable items. So those are the myriads of problems, coupled with the attendant problems as regards producing the crop itself, also producing the livestock, and also looking at the environment. What's your take on this agric board talk? Secondly, I also want you to talk through, quick wins, because Nigeria has a revenue problem, but we must be able to show up revenue. How can we get those quick dollars? Obviously, with 1.3, 1.4 million barrels per day, we can't get a lot. Could gas bring about that? What more can we use to show up government revenue? Could solid minerals bring about that? Because a lot of illegal business still going on in some areas in solid minerals, like we heard of cases in Zamfara and some other parts like that. They gave the last president a big gold bar the other time. How much has gold added to our national currency outlay?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Let me take the first one about agricultural production. And the issue about post-harvest losses. I think these are areas, and the community boards you mentioned, these are areas that have to be handled. Primarily try to liaise with the state governments, not just at the federal level. The federal level will not be able to handle the countrywide issues. So the sub-nationals will have to play a very key role here. But there has to be production first. And I think that should be the first area the new government should focus on. Let there be production. And like I said in a different fora, even on this station, we need to address the issue of security. Once you address that, and then we now have production coming up, then the next stage will be to talk about how do we handle post-harvest losses. Let us produce first. Let us remove the inhibitions to production. We remove them in the area of agriculture, and one of the inhibitions is all these so-called, to me it is so-called farmer-header clashes. It's not a clash. It's an invasion of people's farmlands. But that is another story. So let us remove those inhibitions to productions and let people now begin to produce. Government should provide incentives. People can go to farm and actually enhance production. And then the next stage is to look at those post-harvest losses. That is what we can do in phases. Then the other area is for government to have what we call guaranteed prices for farmers. In other words, even if there's going to be post-harvest losses, you need to say, whatever you don't sell, I will buy. It has happened before. Whatever you don't sell, or people don't buy from you as a farmer, I will buy it from you. And that is a guaranteed price. That will help them to be able to even produce more, knowing that whatever they produce will not be lost. So government has to play a very key role there to ensure there are guaranteed prices. On the other question about revenue, I think it is very, very obvious that we need to address the issue of oil theft. It's humongous. We need to address the issue of oil theft. I don't know why in the country we'll be talking about 700,000 barrels of fuel lost every single day. We cannot meet our OPEC quota. That is an area which I don't need to overflow. People have said that severally at different fora. Oil theft, we need to address that issue. Secondly, taxation. Not those who are already paying tax, but those who are not paying at all, or those who are not paying their fair share of taxes. Enlarge the tax net, the informal sector. We can generate money from that. And then, well, of course, the minerals. We know there are other sectors that actually can actually generate revenue. And then, over and above all, we need to address the cost of governance. That's on the expenditure side. The cost of governance in Nigeria is very, very high. So even if you make all the revenue and you begin to fritter it away with security votes that are humongous, with presidential jets, people traveling abroad regularly for medical, all kinds of costs that should not actually be in a country that is struggling. Address the issue of the cost of governance in this country is very, very high. And if we are able to do that and address the issue of oil theft, and then let people pay tax, those who are not paying. Avoid multiple taxation, but there are people who are not even paying. All these people that have private jets, how much tax do they pay? So if we can raise money from those areas and then cut down the cost of governance, I believe they will be fine with all that.
Well, thank you very much for highlighting the cost of governance, Professor Nwokoma, because a number of people, just a thought around if we're going to put the burden of the effect or consequence of fuel subsidy on Nigerians, then we must also look at savings by ensuring that he follows suit with trimming the cost of governance as well. But I want us to talk about Naira design policy. Let's revisit that because he talks about that too during his inauguration speech. He said it was harshly done, even though there are a number of thoughts around how good it was, how good it wasn't. But what's of concern is that I don't know the last time you saw the new Naira note. What's going on with that? The president has mentioned that both the old and the new will work side by side as legal tender. But what should happen going forward? Because we know the hardship that Nigerians faced in the wake of the Naira redesign policy. Should that just go to waste? Shouldn't we revisit that? What's going on with that? The monies that was spent in the redesigning, in ensuring that we printed new notes. What should happen with that policy?
In my view, that policy had a political connotation. I may be wrong, but I strongly feel it had political connotations. Maybe, approaching elections and then the idea that you want to prevent vote buying, and that some people have been able to stash lots of Naira notes in 500 Naira denominations and 1,000 Naira denominations. So that was the logic, or that was the preamble, or the underlying factor that many of us thought was the reason, or were the reasons why government decided to redesign the Naira. And for some of us, we felt, okay, given that background, that was a good move, because to me, there was really no need to have done that. But in trying to make sure that we had a credible election so that people will not buy votes. So let us put them out of business, those who had already kept money aside. Now, that did not happen. And there are still issues about the election up till today. And some people are in court over what happened. So the Naira redesign policy, in my view, was not too necessary. Yeah, it wasn't. But since we've already embarked on it, because the purpose for which it was embarked on actually are more or less defeated. So now that we have already embarked on it, I think it is proper for government to conclude the process. Conclude the process. But that is my advice to the new administration. Conclude the process. Go through. Because you hardly, just like we rightly said, you hardly find the new notes now in circulation. What we have in circulation now are largely the old notes. So, but having embarked on that project, I think government should complete it between now and December of the year, begin to make sure you gradually begin to phase out the old notes and bring on the new ones, and then look for what were the problems along the way, what were the challenges you had, and see how you can address them. Is it the local printing or whatever are those challenges that you had, and when trying to implement it, you'll be able to address them. But having embarked on it, in my view, it should be concluded, and then the old ones will be phased out, and then we can continue living out, because it had effect on inflation and making cash very, very scarce, even though it has the positive side of also making us go cashless. Many of the payments people make now are by transfers and POS and all that. So that is the positive side, which we cannot wish away. But largely speaking, I think it was politically propelled, and now we are done with politics. Having embarked on it, they should conclude the process and then let life go on as usual.
Okay, I will not forget that it took the Supreme Court to intervene in that issue, which a lot of people asked that why was it the case that the Supreme Court had to intervene in monetary policy issues? That's the kind of country we find ourselves. Let's talk about other things he said in the speech. He talked about manufacturing. Yes, but he mentioned in the past. But what are the problems in manufacturing today? As we speak today, manufacturers in the beverage sector are complaining about increase in taxes for them. Most of their businesses are shut down. I know it's not good to mention brands, but I'll mention for the sake of emphasis. Omo is a popular brand in Nigeria, the detergent sector. But recently, the producers had to come out and say because of the economic situation, they are shutting down that line. We all remember all the brands that have gone down. And we all know when the rain started to beat us as regards manufacturing, the days Dunlop left. We have gotten to that point again. How can we revive Nigeria's thriving manufacturing sector that now taxes are beginning to destroy?
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. I think taking a look at the problems of that of manufacturing sector in Nigeria, we can look at the operating environment as very key. Operating environment is very, very critical. I happen to have been invited to some of the AGMs to deliver one paper or the other, and I can feel the kind of challenges they talk about more frequently. The environment is not very conducive. That is why you mentioned that some of these firms are leaving the country because of a hostile operating environment. That you mentioned taxes, multiple taxation, and also access to foreign exchange, access to raw materials. And what government can do by policy pronouncement, begin to patronize locally made goods, and then put in place the appropriate tariff measures in bringing in foreign goods that will compete with them. Because when you open up your borders and then you have a hostile operating environment for a manufacturer, people can buy the same goods, even better goods, at cheaper prices. I want to say, let's say a detergent. I can buy an imported version at a cheaper price. Then I'm putting out of business the local manufacturing plant because they can't compete in the market. They'll be dumping. So you need to have a mix of economic policies. Number one, take a look at your tariff structure. And take a look at your policy when it comes to government procurement. And being able to promote locally made goods so that if government now begin to patronize a manufacturer, let's say like Innocent, involved in manufacturing cars or car production, you begin to buy from him, begin to buy from local, and then you put tariff that will protect them, protect those local farms. Like we talk about the infant industry argument in economics. When you want to have to protect infant industries by putting in place the appropriate tariff measures. So the issue of taxation, make sure the environment is conducive. So if the Tinubu government wants to enhance manufacturing, they need to go into those areas. Raw materials is not always procured locally. begin to talk about local sourcing of raw materials. And when they have to buy it, you need to give them some kind of window that is special to procure foreign exchange so they can bring in their raw materials. All these things they add to cost. And of course, if they are not producing, what happens? They will lay off staff, and it will enhance your job losses in the economy. So addressing those issues from my interaction with them, those issues that they've mentioned, the hostile operating environment, that is what this government should look into. And then even to bring out goods, if you import raw materials from Apapa, is a big problem. Some people have mentioned bringing out your goods from Apapa, from Nigerian ports, it's even more expensive than bringing the cost of tariff from say, China or from wherever the goods are coming from. So there are many of these factors that are actually affecting your the factory gate price of manufacturers. Protect them by putting some tariff wall against their products. And then secondly, make sure the environment that they're operating in is conducive. Once you do this, I believe they begin to thrive. It will not come in a jiffy, but it has to be a phased plan that we can actually see some progress that is happening in these particular areas. Government cannot just say we are going to do this without putting in place a plan to make sure it happens.
All right, I'm glad you talk about government patronizing local manufacturers. I think it's instructive to note, and you talked about Innocent, that the only state governor that seemed to have used Innocent vehicle during his inauguration was the governor of Abia State, Dr. Alex Oti. That's worthy of note. Even the president didn't use one of our own cars. It would have made such a huge statement.
Soludo also used Innocent.
Innocent. I mean, in this particular, for this particular inauguration. So it would have made such a huge statement if the president, in line with his commitment to manufacturing, to have used one of our own vehicles. But that's besides the point. Now, I'd like you to, talking about creating a conducive environment for business. One area we must talk about for the manufacturing sector, and perhaps many other sectors in Nigeria, is power. And in speaking to Power during his inauguration speech, he had said that he was going to double look at transmission, distribution, double our transmission of power in the next, I mean, he didn't give a timeline, but I know that's something that we must look at if we're looking at making or improving the manufacturing sector. Another area is in terms of investment, attracting foreign investment. One of the things he said was he was advocating for the reduction of interest rates. But the interest rate has risen, or has been, the basis point has risen by the CBN due to inflation rate. So that's another thing he would need to tackle under his administration. In your view, what are things that he needs to do? Number one, I talked about power. Number two, in terms of the interest rate and vis-a-vis the inflation rate in Nigeria currently, how he can begin to tackle these issues.
Yeah, thank you very much. Power generation, power distribution, power transmission, energy transmission, these are issues that we have over the years. And all the governments, he has to be different. All the governments, from Obasanjo, Yaradua, Jonathan, Buhari, they've all said they're going to, even everybody's talking about 10,000 megawatts and all that, 20,000, and all that has just been mere talk. And when people hear this type of thing, I'm going to increase the electricity to make it more available. We say, so what rings in your mind is that we've heard this before. We have heard this before over time. There's nothing that is being said. Every government coming in, we are going to address that. Buhari said that he failed. And there are so many programs that were put in place by him, but they didn't work. Why? We need to be able to find why are this is not working. What are you going to do about generation? What are you going to do about giving the states power to generate their own power for their own use? How can you make sure that every state can produce produce their own power without being on the grid, so that you can make your own power? Now you put all the power beyond a particular level on the grid, and then you now begin to distribute accordingly. So, and these are challenges. We need to see what can be done differently. If not, we'll just keep on going around in circles. Every government will come, I'm going to make power more available, and just be like a general speech. There's need to talk about how will you enhance generation. How are you going to enhance or talk about alternative sources of power apart from the grid? Talk about solar, and other sources. generation, transmission, and distribution. We need to have specific plans and programs on how it can be enhanced. And then make sure some will be gas-powered, some could be thermal, and so on. Then on the issue of attracting investments, we know about the issue of a country risk. Nigeria has a very, very high country risk profile. The country risk profile for Nigeria is very, very high. How will we address that? How will somebody bring his money and invest in Maiduguri and be sure that his money will come back to him? How will somebody begin to come in? Because you can see some kind of capital flight in the country. Even portfolio investments have left over the past few periods because when we talk about high level of country risk, how do you intend to attract power? Because FDI flows into a country for three different reasons. Either they are resource seeking in the oil sector, it's resource seeking, market seeking, or they are seeking for efficiency in production. The FDI we have in Nigeria is coming in basically, the bulk of it is basically a resource seeking. The oil and gas sector, they are looking at a resource and they are flowing in. MTN brought in because of market. It's looking for a very big market. Nigeria has a big market. So what type of FDI are you going to bring in that will talk about coming to the energy sector? Maybe the market is very, very wide. So FDI does not just flow because they like you or because of your speech. You must find out what is in it for them. And that is how you can be able to attract capital into any sector at all. And the other issue about the monetary policy rate, the MPR, 18.5%. The MPR, the Monetary Policy Committee has been meeting over time and increasing the MPR because of inflation, largely. How do you address the cost push factors for inflation so that the MPR will not be going as high? These are critical questions you need to ask. The MPR is 18.5. The central bank has been increasing the MPR over time because they want to fight inflation. They want to squeeze credit so that money will not be easily available to drive inflation. And they're also assuming that it is driven by money. You look at the other factors. When you address those factors that is driving inflation, it will help you to bring down your interest rates. Because the interest rates needs to be benchmarked against inflation rates. Now we have inflation at about 22-point-something%. You have to bring that one down before you can talk of bringing down your MPR to something less than what it is now. The focus should be on fighting inflation. And once you fight inflation, automatically you will also indirectly fight your MPR, the interest rates. Because the banks actually will have to make money and there must be a positive return on capital. If you are investing something at 80% and your inflation, it is being eroded by 22%, of course, it makes no sense. So in my view, the focus should be more on fighting inflation. Once you fight inflation, definitely you are also fighting the high interest rates. So that should be the focus. And central bank has a very big job to do in this area. Okay. Identify those cost push factors that is pushing away, like the Naira cash withdrawal issue and all that. They drove up inflation, and definitely they are pushing up the MPR. That should be where the battle is. Address inflation, and all these other factors will actually, they will be in line, in my view.
But the sad reality is there's no timeline to that because those causes, apart from monetary causes of inflation, are legacy issues like insecurity and all of that, and other problems that are tenants in the country. Well, thank you so much, Prof, for your time. Really, really appreciate you for your insights. I mean, that's about all we can take on the conversation with you.